Hello everybody. There we go. We're back again. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody here to the Attorney General's office and acknowledge Colonel Borzakowski and Colonel Manning, who are here with me as well as members of their command staffs. We're here to announce that the Providence County grand jury this morning reported that no criminal charges are warranted in connection with the investigation of matters arising from the incident at the Wyatt Detention Center on August 14, 2019. Because this was a grand jury investigation under the current state of Rhode Island law, there's relatively little that I can say with respect to what occurred before the grand jury in terms of the substance of the testimony presented or the grand jury's deliberations or the reasoning behind their decision. In fact, prosecutors are not present for a grand jury's deliberations, nor does the grand jury share its reasoning with prosecutors. I think it's worth describing, particularly in this case, how the grand jury process works in general. The grand jury consists of 23 people selected at random by the court from Rhode Island's population. In Providence County, they sit for 6 weeks at a time, every day of the week. It is the role of this office as attorneys to advise the grand jury of the applicable law as it pertains to the relevant factual situation and to present witnesses and other forms of evidence, such as documents or electronic evidence. At the conclusion of the evidentiary presentation, the prosecutors, and this is our critical role, a role that we own, instruct the grand juries on the applicable law. In other words, we define for the grand jurors the elements of the crimes that the grand jurors are considering. Once those instructions have been given, the prosecutors leave the grand jury room and the grand jurors vote to decide whether there is probable cause based on the evidence that they have seen or heard that a crime or crimes have been committed. Turning to this investigation, the investigation conducted by the prosecutors of this office and the Rhode Island State Police, assisted by the Central Falls Police Department, was extremely thorough. Over 70 witnesses were interviewed by prosecutors and or detectives. Approximately 75 pieces of video footage were obtained and analyzed. Medical records were sought in connection with anyone who alleged injury as a result of the incident in question. The grand jury heard testimony and saw evidence in this case over many, many days. As I have said previously, we asked the grand jury to investigate and consider evidence pertaining to the entirety of the incident at the Wyatt that occurred on August 14th, which they did. However, we did not ask the grand jury to consider charges against the protesters, and here's why. It is true that some protesters peacefully, and I want to emphasize, peacefully, blocked an access point to the Wyatt Detention Center. It is also true that they could have been arrested for that conduct. In fact, it may be that some expected to be arrested for that conduct. Nevertheless, law enforcement in its discretion, an exercise of discretion with which I take no issue, chose not to arrest them for that conduct. Accordingly, I did not and I do not believe that the conduct of those protesters, in terms of whether charges should be brought, was an appropriate matter for the grand jury to consider. And so we did not instruct them to consider that issue. I chose to bring this case to the grand jury because I believe that given the breadth of conduct here, the large number of people involved, and the potential need to use compulsory process to gain evidence in this case, the use of the grand jury would ensure the most thorough investigation of this matter. The grand jury worked really hard to sort through all the testimony and evidence that was presented to them. From my own experience, I am sure that they had to deal with complicated legal and factual issues, including critically determining the intent of those whose conduct was within the scope of their investigation, and whether that intent rose to the level of criminal misconduct. Often, these are not easy issues for grand jurors or trial jurors to grapple with. I met with the grand jurors this morning, and I am grateful to them for their public service. As I said a few months ago, a peaceful protest, a right enshrined in our Constitution, devolved into an extremely unfortunate incident because of several unfortunate decisions. I want to be clear, none of those unfortunate decisions were made by protesters. Had the decisions been made differently, I believe that this matter could have been avoided. There is much to learn from this incident, and it is my hope that we will do so. And so with that, I'll take questions if you